My family held an intervention. You're dragging us down. Meanwhile, I'd been covering Dad's gambling debts. I said, "You're right, I should stop." Dad's bookie showed up the next day. "Hey, Reddit, I need to get this off my chest because what happened to my family this week has been absolutely insane. I'm still processing everything, but writing it out might help me figure out what the hell just happened to my life. I am 26 female, and I've been the designated family problem solver since I was probably 12 years old. You know that kid who reminds everyone about homework, makes sure bills get paid, keeps track of everyone's appointments? Yeah, that was me. While my older brother Jake, 29 male, was out being the golden child athlete, and my younger sister Chloe, 23 female, was busy being the artistic free spirit, I was apparently born to handle everyone else's responsibilities. Growing up, our family looked pretty normal from the outside. Dad worked construction, Mom was a part-time receptionist at a dental office. We lived in this decent three-bedroom house in suburbia. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. The problem started when I was in high school, though I didn't really understand what was happening at the time. Dad would disappear on Saturday afternoons, saying he was going to help his buddy Frank with some project or another. Sometimes he'd come home in an amazing mood, taking us all out for dinner at the nice steakhouse downtown. Other times he'd come back quiet and irritable, snapping at Mom about spending money on groceries or complaining about bills that weren't even due yet. Mom would give me these meaningful looks during his bad moods, like we were sharing some secret. But whenever I asked what was wrong, she'd just say Dad was stressed about work and to give him space. Jake was usually at football practice or hanging out with his girlfriend, and Chloe was still pretty young, so it mostly fell to me to keep the peace in the house. The pattern became this weird routine. Dad would have his Saturday disappearances, sometimes Sunday too. Monday through Friday, he'd be normal dad, helping with homework, watching TV with us, grilling burgers in the backyard. But weekends were always tense, like we were all walking on eggshells waiting to see what mood he'd come home in. When I was 16, I started working at a local coffee shop after school. Nothing major, just saving money for college and having some spending cash. That's when Mom started asking me for small loans here and there. $20 for groceries when she was short, $50 for Chloe's school supplies, $100 when the water heater needed repairs. She always promised to pay me back, and sometimes she did. But more often than not, my paycheck would just disappear into whatever crisis was happening that week. I didn't mind much at first because I figured that's what families do, right? Help each other out when money gets tight. College was a nightmare to navigate financially. I'd saved up some money from the coffee shop, got a partial scholarship for academics, and took out loans for the rest. But even then, Mom kept calling with emergencies. The car needed new brakes. Chloe needed money for art supplies. Jake's football equipment was expensive. Each crisis was always urgent, always necessary, and always somehow my responsibility to help solve. I worked 2 jobs in college to stay afloat. Early morning shifts at a campus bookstore, late evening shifts at a restaurant near campus. My grades were good enough to keep the scholarship, but I was exhausted constantly. My roommate used to joke that I was like a ghost because she'd see me leave at sunrise and come back after midnight most days. Meanwhile, Jake was having the time of his life. Full-ride football scholarship, partying every weekend, dating cheerleaders, the whole college movie experience. Chloe was in high school getting straight A's in art classes and being the family princess. And me? I was working myself to death to keep everyone else comfortable. The really messed up part is that I thought this was normal. I thought every family had one person who handled the money problems and kept everything together. It never occurred to me that maybe other families didn't constantly have financial emergencies, or that maybe my siblings should have been contributing too. After college, I got a decent job at an accounting firm downtown. Nothing glamorous, but stable income with benefits and room for advancement. I moved into a small apartment about 20 minutes from my parents' house, thinking finally I'd have some breathing room to build my own life. Wrong. The emergency phone calls just got worse. Now instead of 20 here and 50 there, Mom was asking for $300 to catch up on the mortgage, $500 because the furnace died, $1,000 because Dad's truck needed major repairs. Every time I'd ask what happened to their income, I'd get the same runaround. Business was slow for Dad. Mom's hours got cut at the dental office. Unexpected expenses kept coming up. It was always something, and it was always urgent, and it was always somehow my responsibility to fix. This is where I need to explain what I slowly figured out over the years, because I was apparently the only one in the family who didn't know what was really going on. Dad wasn't helping his buddy Frank on weekends. He was going to the track, sometimes the casino, sometimes private poker games, sometimes just betting on sports at various bars around town. I didn't find out until I was 24, and even then it was by accident. I'd stopped by my parents' house unannounced to drop off money Mom had asked for, and Dad was on the phone in the kitchen, having this intense conversation about odds and point spreads and something about being good for the money by Tuesday. When he saw me, he hung up fast and started acting all casual, asking about my job and whether I wanted some coffee. But I'd heard enough to start putting pieces together. All those mood swings after weekend disappearances, all the mysterious financial emergencies, the way Mom would look stressed and apologetic whenever she asked me for money. That night, I confronted Mom about it. She broke down crying and admitted that Dad had been gambling for years, way before I even started working in high school. It had gotten really bad during my college years, to the point where they almost lost the house twice. The only reason they kept up with the mortgage was because of the money I'd been sending home. She begged me not to say anything to Dad about knowing, said he was ashamed and trying to get better, and that confronting him would just make things worse. She promised they were working on it together, and that it wouldn't be much longer before things got back to normal. Like an idiot, I believed her. I thought if I just helped a little longer, Dad would get his act together, and we could all move on. I had no idea how deep the hole really was. Over the next 2 years, the requests for money got bigger and more frequent. 2,000 because Dad owed money to some people and they were getting impatient. 5,000 because the bank was threatening foreclosure. 3,000 because there was this sure thing bet that would pay off enough to clear all the debts. That last one should have been my wake-up call. Mom actually asked me to give Dad money specifically to gamble with, saying he was confident he could win back everything he owed. I almost said no, but she looked so desperate and scared that I caved. Took out a cash advance on my credit card and handed it over. Obviously, Dad lost it all. Not only did the sure thing not pay off, but he somehow ended up owing even more money than before. Mom called me crying that night, apologizing over and over, saying she knew it was wrong to ask, but she didn't know what else to do. By the time I was 26, I'd given my family over $60,000. Let me repeat that. $60,000. Money I'd worked 2 jobs to earn in college. Money I'd saved by living in a tiny apartment and eating ramen. Money I should have been using to pay off my own student loans or save for a house down payment. My credit cards were maxed out from cash advances. I'd emptied my savings account multiple times. I was even borrowing money from friends occasionally, making up stories about unexpected expenses, just so I could turn around and give it to my family. The crazy thing is, Jake and Chloe had no idea any of this was happening. As far as they knew, everything was fine at home. Dad was still working construction, Mom was still working at the dental office, and their only financial worry was normal stuff like car payments and grocery bills. Jake had gotten married to his college girlfriend, Sarah, and they were living this perfect suburban life. Nice apartment, good jobs, weekend trips, the whole Instagram-worthy lifestyle. Chloe was in her senior year of college on a partial art scholarship, but Mom and Dad were covering her room and board costs without any problem as far as she knew. Neither of them was contributing anything to the family finances, not even during major holidays or birthdays. I was the only one who ever helped with anything, and they both seemed to think that was just my personality. Maya, the responsible one. Maya, the helper. Maya, who had everything figured out. What they didn't know is that I was slowly drowning, working overtime constantly just to stay ahead of my credit card payments, declining invitations to go out with friends because I couldn't afford dinner at restaurants, buying groceries at discount stores, and clipping coupons like my grandmother used to do during the Depression. My coworkers started commenting on how tired I looked all the time. My boss pulled me aside once to ask if everything was okay at home because my performance was starting to slip. I was having anxiety attacks in bathroom stalls at work, panicking about how I was going to make my rent if Dad needed another emergency payment. But every time I thought about saying no to one of Mom's requests, I'd imagine Dad getting hurt by whoever he owed money to, or the family losing their house, or my parents' marriage falling apart. The guilt was overwhelming, so I kept saying yes and figuring I'd somehow make it work. Then came last month, when everything finally exploded. I was at work on a Thursday morning when Mom called, which was unusual because she normally texted first. I answered thinking maybe it was a real emergency this time, like someone was in the hospital or something. Instead, I got Mom crying hysterically saying that Dad owed $25,000 to some very serious people, and they were demanding payment by the end of the week or there would be consequences. $25,000. Like that was just a normal amount of money to casually have lying around. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the number was so absurd. I told Mom there was absolutely no way I could come up with that much money. My credit cards were maxed, my savings account had maybe $300, and my next paycheck was already allocated to bills. She started begging, saying maybe I could take out a loan or borrow against my 401k, or ask my boss for an advance, throwing out suggestions like I hadn't already thought of every possible way to generate cash over the past few years. That's when I finally asked the question I should have asked a long time ago. Why weren't Jake and Chloe helping with any of this? Why was it always just my responsibility to solve Dad's problems? Mom got defensive immediately. Said Jake and Sarah were young and just getting started, and it wouldn't be fair to burden them with this. Said Chloe was still in college and didn't have any money anyway. Said I was the one who was stable and successful and in the best position to help. I pointed out that Jake made more money than I did at his engineering job, and that Chloe could at least get a part-time job to help with something. But Mom insisted they didn't need to know about Dad's problems, and that involving them would just cause unnecessary drama in the family. For the first time in years, I told Mom no. I said I couldn't help this time, and that maybe it was time for Dad to face the consequences of his choices. I suggested they talk to a lawyer about bankruptcy, or look into gambling addiction treatment, or consider asking other family members for help. Mom hung up on me. Actually hung up, like I was some stranger who'd offended her instead of her daughter, who'd been bailing the family out for years. That weekend, I didn't hear from anyone in my family. No texts, no calls, no nothing. I figured they were mad at me for refusing to help, but I tried to stay strong. I went grocery shopping, did laundry, caught up on some TV shows I'd been too busy to watch. For the first time in months, I had a relaxing weekend. Monday morning, Jake called. This was weird because Jake and I rarely talked directly. Usually all family communication went through Mom, with her passing messages back and forth between us kids. Jake asked if I could come over to Mom and Dad's house Tuesday evening for a family meeting. Said there were some things we all needed to discuss, and it was important that everyone was there. I should have known something was up by how formal he sounded. Jake's usually pretty casual about everything, but this felt rehearsed somehow. Still, I said yes because I figured maybe they'd finally decided to have an honest conversation about Dad's gambling and how we could all help him get treatment. Tuesday evening, I drove over to my parents' house with this cautious optimism. Maybe this crisis would actually bring our family together. Maybe everyone would finally understand what I'd been dealing with for years. Maybe we could figure out a real solution instead of just throwing money at the problem over and over. I walked into the living room to find everyone already there, sitting in this weird semicircle formation. Mom and Dad on the couch, Jake and Sarah in the armchairs, Chloe cross-legged on the floor. They'd left the wooden kitchen chair facing all of them, obviously meant for me. The setup felt wrong immediately, like I was walking into a courtroom where I was the defendant and everyone else was the jury. But I sat down anyway, figuring maybe they just wanted to make sure everyone could see each other while we talked. Jake cleared his throat and looked at this piece of paper in his hands. Actual notes. He'd prepared notes for whatever this conversation was going to be. Maya, he started, still looking at the paper. We've all been talking, and we're concerned about you, about your behavior and how it's affecting the whole family. I was confused. My behavior? I asked what he meant, and Jake looked around at everyone else like he was getting confirmation to continue. You've been really negative lately, Chloe jumped in. Always stressed out, always complaining about money. It's bringing everyone down. Sarah nodded along. When we're all together, you just seem angry all the time, like you don't want to be here. I looked at my parents, expecting them to jump in with some clarification about what this was really about. Instead, Dad was studying his hands, and Mom was giving me this disappointed look. Sweetheart, Mom said in this patronizing tone, we know you're struggling with some personal issues, but taking it out on the family isn't fair to anyone. Personal issues. They were calling Dad's gambling addiction my personal issues. Jake consulted his notes again. We think you need to take a step back from family gatherings until you can work through whatever's going on with you. Get some therapy maybe, or just take some time to figure out why you're so resentful. The realization hit me like a truck. They were staging an intervention. For me, they thought I was the problem. I asked them to clarify what exactly they thought I needed to take a step back from. Were they saying I wasn't welcome at family events anymore? Not forever, Chloe said quickly. Just until you can be more positive. More like your old self. My old self. The version of me who smiled and nodded and handed over money whenever anyone asked. The version who worked 2 jobs to pay for everyone else's problems and never complained about it. I looked around at their faces, these people I'd sacrificed years of my life to help, and realized they genuinely thought I was the toxic one in this situation. They'd completely rewritten history in their minds to make me the villain. Sarah was the one who delivered the final blow. Jake told me you've been really irresponsible with money lately, borrowing from friends and stuff. Maybe getting your finances together should be your first priority before you worry about family relationships. Irresponsible with money. I'd been borrowing from friends to give money to my family, and somehow that made me the fiscally irresponsible one. That's when I started laughing. Not cute giggles, but this bitter, incredulous laughter that made everyone shift uncomfortably in their seats. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown, which honestly maybe I was. You're right, I said once I got control of myself. You're absolutely right. I should stop. Jake looked relieved. We're just trying to help you, Maya. We love you, but your negativity has been really hard on everyone. No, I continued, still smiling this weird smile I could feel on my face. You're right that I should stop. I should stop enabling Dad's gambling addiction. I should stop covering his debts so you all can pretend everything's fine. I should definitely stop sacrificing my financial future so everyone else can stay comfortable. The room went dead silent. Dad's head snapped up, and Mom's face went white. What are you talking about? Chloe asked, looking genuinely confused. I turned to Dad. Should I tell them, or do you want to? Dad looked like he was going to be sick. Mom was shaking her head slightly, pleading with me not to say anything, but I was done protecting everyone else's feelings at the expense of my own sanity. Dad's been gambling for years, I said, looking directly at Jake and Chloe. He's lost everything we had, and then some. The only reason Mom and Dad still have their house is because I've been covering his debts. $60,000 over the past few years. Chloe's mouth fell open. Jake looked back and forth between me and Dad like he was trying to process what he was hearing. That's why I've been stressed about money, I continued. That's why I seem angry all the time. Because I've been working myself to death to keep this family afloat while you all blamed me for being negative. Sarah looked at Jake with this horrified expression. Is this true? Before Jake could answer, Dad finally spoke up. It's not that simple, Maya. You're making it sound worse than it is. $25,000 owed to bookies by the end of last week, I said. How exactly am I making that sound worse than it is? Mom started crying, but not the manipulative crying she usually did when she wanted money. This was genuine shame and panic. You weren't supposed to tell them, she whispered. Why? I asked. Because then they might actually have to help? Because then Jake might have to contribute something besides judgment, and Chloe might have to get a job? Jake stood up, pacing around the room. This is insane. Dad, how could you not tell us? Because we didn't want to burden you kids, Dad said quietly. Maya was doing fine helping out, and you two have your own lives to worry about. I wasn't doing fine, I said firmly. I haven't been fine for years. I've been drowning, and instead of asking how you could help me, you decided I was the problem that needed to be fixed. The intervention they'd planned for me completely fell apart as Jake and Chloe started asking Dad questions about how bad the gambling was and why he'd never told them. Sarah kept looking at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time, realizing he'd been completely oblivious to his own family's crisis. I sat there watching them process the information, feeling this strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Finally, everyone knew the truth. Finally, I wasn't carrying the secret alone. But I was also angry. Angrier than I'd ever been in my life. So here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up to leave. You're right that I need to step back from this family. Not because I'm negative, but because I'm done being everyone's personal ATM. Dad's gambling debts are no longer my problem. The mortgage is no longer my problem. Any financial crisis that comes up is no longer my problem. Mom started to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm done. Find another way to handle your problems because I won't be available anymore. I walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. And just so we're clear, the reason I seemed angry during family gatherings is because I was sitting there watching everyone enjoy themselves with money I'd worked overtime to provide, while you all acted like I was just naturally bitter person. That would make anyone resentful. I left them there to figure out how to clean up the mess they'd created. Drove home feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the fact that my family was probably imploding behind me. That was 6 days ago. I thought the hardest part was over. Yesterday morning, I was getting ready for work when someone started pounding on my apartment door. Not knocking, pounding, like they were trying to break it down. I looked through the peephole and saw two large men in expensive suits standing in my hallway. They looked like the kind of people you don't want to keep waiting. I opened the door with the chain still attached. Can I help you? The older one, maybe 50 with graying hair and cold eyes, smiled at me. But it wasn't a friendly smile. Maya, we're friends of your father's. Mind if we come in? Every warning bell in my head started going off. These were definitely not Dad's construction buddies. I'm actually on my way to work, I said through the crack in the door. Maybe you could come back later? This won't take long, the younger one said. He was huge, probably 6.5 feet tall, with hands that looked like they could crush bowling balls. We just need to discuss your father's situation. I told them I didn't know anything about my father's situation and that they should talk to him directly. The older man's smile got wider and somehow more threatening. See, that's the problem. Your father seems to have disappeared. His wife says she doesn't know where he is, but she mentioned you might be able to help us out. My blood ran cold. Mom had given them my name and address. I don't have any money, I said, which was basically true. After years of bailing out my family, I had maybe $800 total between my checking account and savings. Your father owes us $28,000, the older man continued conversationally. Interest keeps adding up, you understand. Time-sensitive situation. 28,000. It had been 25,000 just a week ago. He borrowed money from you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Let's say he made promises he couldn't keep. But don't worry, we're reasonable people. We know family helps family. The way he said it made me sick. These people thought I was another resource they could tap, just like everyone else in my life. I'm not responsible for my father's debts, I said firmly. The younger man stepped closer to the door. Funny thing about family debts. They have a way of becoming everyone's problem. That was when I realized just how deep in trouble Dad really was. These weren't credit card companies sending polite payment reminders. These were people who collected debts through intimidation and violence. You seem like a smart girl, the older man said. I'm sure you can figure out how to help us resolve this situation before it gets unpleasant for everyone involved. I told them I needed time to think about it, and they said they'd be back tomorrow for an answer. Then they left, but not before the younger one casually mentioned that they'd noticed I had a nice car in the parking lot. After they were gone, I sat on my couch shaking. This was what Dad had been hiding from us all these years. This was why Mom had been so desperate for money, so scared when I said no. I called Dad's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Called the house, and Mom answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone. Maya, thank God. Did those men find you? You gave them my address? I was trying not to scream. They said they just wanted to talk to you. They seemed nice enough. Nice enough. These loan sharks seemed nice enough to her. Mom, where is Dad? She started crying again. He's staying at a motel somewhere. He's scared to come home because those people keep showing up at the house. He says he's going to figure something out. But Maya, I don't know what to do. What exactly does he owe money for? Between sobs, Mom explained that Dad had been borrowing money from these people for months, promising he could pay it back with his next big win. When I refused to give them the $25,000 last week, Dad had panicked and borrowed even more money to try to win enough to cover the original debt. Obviously, he'd lost it all. Not only was the original debt still there, but now there was additional money owed plus interest and penalties for late payment. They want $28,000 by tomorrow, Mom whispered. Maya, I know you said you were done, but this is really serious. These aren't the kind of people you can ignore. I hung up on her. Actually hung up. Something I'd never done to my mother in my entire life. Then I called Jake. Maya, I was just about to call you. We've been talking about Dad's situation, and Sarah and I want to help however we can. 2 men just showed up at my apartment demanding $28,000 for Dad's gambling debts. Silence on the other end of the line. Are you serious? I told him about the visit, about Mom giving them my address, about Dad hiding in a motel somewhere while his family dealt with the consequences of his choices. This is insane, Jake said. We have to call the police. And tell them what? That Dad borrowed money from loan sharks and now they want to be paid back? That's not exactly illegal. Jake was quiet for a moment. How much do you think we can come up with between all of us? We? Sarah and I have some savings. Chloe probably has a little money. You must have something put aside. I started laughing again, that same bitter laugh from the intervention. Jake, I have $800 to my name. Total. I've given this family everything I had for years, and now you want me to figure out how to come up with more money to solve another crisis. But these people sound dangerous. Yeah, they do, which is why I'm not getting involved anymore. Maya, you can't just abandon the family when things get serious. Watch me. I hung up on him too. An hour later, Chloe called, crying and begging me not to let anything happen to Dad. Said Jake had told her everything, and she was terrified that these loan shark people might hurt someone. I felt bad for Chloe. She was the youngest, and she'd been kept in the dark about all this just like Jake had. But I also wasn't going to let guilt manipulate me back into fixing everyone else's problems. Chloe, I'm 26 years old and I have no savings, no investments, and maxed out credit cards because I've spent years covering for Dad's addiction. I can't help anymore, even if I wanted to. But what if they hurt him? Then maybe he should have thought about that before he borrowed money from dangerous people. She called me heartless and hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump, thinking the loan sharks had come back early. I kept imagining Dad getting beaten up in some motel parking lot, or those men showing up at Jake's house looking for money. But I also kept thinking about the intervention, about how my family had convinced themselves that I was the problem, about how they'd been perfectly happy to let me sacrifice everything while they lived their comfortable lives in denial. This morning I woke up to 17 missed calls. 12 from Mom, 3 from Jake, 2 from Chloe. I listened to the voicemails while drinking my coffee. Mom, Maya, please call me back. Those men came to the house again, and they're getting impatient. Jake, we're all going to meet this afternoon to figure out how to handle this. You need to be there. Chloe, I'm dropping out of college to get a job and help with money. This is all falling apart. That last one almost broke my resolve. Chloe shouldn't have to drop out of school because of Dad's gambling addiction. But then I remembered that I'd essentially dropped out of having a normal young adult life years ago to cover these same debts, and no one had been concerned about that. I called Jake back. Thank God, he said when he answered. We're meeting at Mom and Dad's at 2. Can you make it? I'm not coming to another family meeting. Maya, this is serious. We have to figure out how to come up with this money. You figure it out. You wanted me to step back from the family, remember? Congratulations, you got your wish. That was before we knew about all this. No, Jake. You knew something was wrong. You all knew I was stressed about money and working constantly, and seemed angry all the time. But instead of asking what was going on, you decided I was just a negative person who needed to fix her attitude. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. It was easier to blame me than to look at why I might be struggling. I hung up before he could respond. At lunch, I walked to the bank and withdrew my $800 in cash. Then I went to a FedEx store and mailed it to my parents' address with a note that said, "This is everything I have left. Good luck." When I got back to work, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from my family. I turned it off and focused on getting through the rest of my workday. Tonight, I'm sitting in my apartment writing this post and trying to figure out what happens next. Part of me is terrified that those loan sharks will come back looking for me. Part of me feels guilty about Abe update. The loan sharks haven't been back, but my mom called to tell me Dad's going to try to work out some kind of payment plan with them. Jake and Sarah are apparently taking out a loan to help, and Chloe did drop out of school to get a full-time job. The family is finally dealing with Dad's addiction as a family problem, instead of expecting me to handle it alone. I feel bad that it took such a dramatic crisis for everyone to step up, but I'm also relieved that it's not my crisis to manage anymore. I blocked all their numbers, and I'm focusing on rebuilding my own financial life for the first time in years. Sometimes walking away really is the only option left. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.